The road outside my window doesn't feel real anymore. It stretches too far into the dark, swallowed by trees that never seem to move even when the wind should be loud. I keep the porch light on, but it flickers like it's trying to forget me. Sometimes late at night, I hear soft footsteps outside my house. Slow, careful, almost polite, like someone trying not to be noticed. It started the first time I saw them. I had just moved into the suburbs, thinking it would be peaceful here. Quiet mornings, safe nights, a place where nothing ever really happens. But on the third night, I noticed two children standing at the edge of my driveway. They didn't move, didn't blink. Their skin looked too pale in the streetlight, and their eyes were wrong. Too dark, too empty, like someone had erased everything behind them. When I opened the door just a little, just enough to ask if they were lost, the air changed. The silence became heavier. I remember one of them tilting their head, as if listening to something inside my house that I couldn't hear, and then the smaller one spoke. "We can't come in unless you let us." That's when I saw it, the faint reflection of my own living room in their eyes, like they had already been inside before I even made a choice. I should have closed the door then, but I didn't, and that was the first mistake of many. The night arrived softly over the suburbs, like it didn't want to be noticed. The sky was a dull shade of gray-black, pressed low over the rooftops. Streetlights flickered in uneven pulses, humming faintly as if tired. My house at the end of the street, half wrapped in shadow, half lit by a porch bulb that never stayed steady for long. I remember the silence first. Not empty silence, but heavy, waiting. Inside, the air felt warm, still holding the day's dust and faint smell of wood and fabric. Outside, everything was colder, sharper, like the world had turned to glass. That's when I heard it. A knock, soft, measured, almost polite. 3 taps, then a pause, then 3 again. I froze near the hallway, fingers resting against the wall. The house creaked faintly under its own weight, and for a moment, I told myself it was nothing. Wind, branches, a trick of the quiet. But the knock came again, closer in feeling this time, like it wasn't just at the door, but inside the rhythm of the house itself. I stepped forward slowly, every movement too loud in my own ears. The floor felt colder under my feet, the air thinning with each step toward the front door. The porch light flickered, once, twice, then steadied. I looked through the peephole. Nothing, just the empty porch, wet wood from earlier rain. A faint mist hanging near the steps like breath held too long. No movement, no shape. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched back through the hole. Then the knock came again, right there, not distant, not uncertain, right at the door. My hand moved before my thoughts could stop it. The lock clicked, sharp and final in the quiet. The door opened just a fraction, letting in a slice of cold air that didn't belong. And that's when I saw them. 2 children stood at the edge of the porch. Still, too still. They didn't fidget, didn't shift weight, didn't react to the cold wind brushing past them. Their skin was pale under the porch light, almost gray-white, like the light didn't fully land on them. And their clothes, simple, clean, too neat for this hour. But it was their eyes that made the air inside me go tight. Dark, completely dark. No reflection, no light, just depth that didn't feel like eyes at all. The smaller one tilted its head slightly, not curious, measured, like it had practiced a movement. "We're sorry to bother you," it said. Its voice was soft, carefully shaped, like words learned from memory, not feeling. The other child didn't move, didn't blink, only watched. My throat tightened, but I stayed at the door, half open, half safe. "What do you want?" I asked. A pause, too long for a child. Then the smaller one spoke again. "We need help." The words were simple, polite, but they didn't sit right in the air. They lingered, like they were waiting for something underneath them to be understood. The wind shifted behind them. The trees across the street rustled, but no branches moved on the porch. No sound touched them directly, and yet the air around the children felt heavier, pressured, like the space behind them wasn't empty, like something was standing just out of sight, waiting for me to notice it. I glanced past them instinctively. Nothing there, but the feeling stayed. The older child finally moved, just slightly, one step closer to the door, not crossing the threshold. Not yet. The porch light flickered again. This time, it didn't recover fully. Half the porch dipped into shadow for a second too long. In that darkness, I thought I saw something shift behind them. Not a shape exactly, more like absence bending wrong. When the light returned, it was gone. The children hadn't changed position, but everything felt closer. "We can't come in unless you let us," the smaller one said. Its voice didn't rise, didn't ask. It simply stated it, like a rule already written. My fingers tightened on the door edge. The wood felt colder now, almost damp. The house behind me seemed quieter than before, as if it was listening too, waiting for my answer. I should have closed the door. I know that now, but something in their stillness made it hard to move. Not fear exactly, something quieter, heavier, like hesitation had become physical. The older child's head tilted just slightly, and for a moment I felt it, not their presence. Something behind their presence, like the porch wasn't the end of it, like they were only the beginning of what had already stepped too close. The house lights inside flickered once, soft, weak, as if reacting to something I hadn't agreed to yet. The children didn't smile, didn't plead. They just waited, and in that waiting, it felt like the night itself had leaned closer to hear what I would choose next. The night after the knock did not feel like a new night. It felt like the same moment, stretched thin across time. The air inside my house was still warm, but it no longer felt safe. It felt occupied, like something had left fingerprints on the silence and never cleaned them away. Outside, the street stayed quiet. Too quiet. No dogs barking. No cars passing. Even the wind seemed careful, like it was avoiding my house. I stood near the hallway again, listening for anything that didn't belong. And then I remembered something. A warning. Not loud. Not direct. Just something a neighbor once said while watering plants in the late afternoon light. As if it didn't matter. "Don't open the door for children you don't recognize after sunset," she had said. She laughed when she said it, like it was a story people told to scare themselves. But that same neighbor wasn't home anymore. Her porch light had been off since yesterday. No car, no movement, no answer. Just silence where life used to feel normal. And now, I understood why people stopped talking about her. A soft tap came again. Not loud, patient. 3 knocks. The same pattern. I didn't move at first, but the sound didn't stop existing just because I ignored it. It stayed there, pressed against the house like it belonged. When I finally looked through the peephole, the porch looked the same as before. Wet wood, thin fog, a streetlight buzzing far away. But something felt wrong about the emptiness, like it was arranged, like it was waiting for me to notice the shape of what wasn't there. Then I saw them again, closer than before, still at the edge of the porch, but no longer distant. The porch light flickered weakly above them, casting their faces in uneven light. Their eyes were still wrong, still hollow, still deep enough to feel like falling. The smaller one spoke first. "We didn't mean to scare you," it said. Its voice stayed gentle, too gentle, like it had learned kindness without understanding it. The older one didn't speak. It just watched the door. Not me, the door. I kept my hand near the lock, but didn't open it further. "What do you need?" I asked again. A pause followed, but this time it felt different. Not empty, measuring, like something was being decided behind the silence. "We're lost," the smaller one said finally. The words should have sounded harmless, but instead they felt rehearsed, placed carefully into the air, like they were chosen instead of felt. The wind behind them shifted again. Not forward, not back, sideways, like it didn't know how to move around them. A soft creak came from somewhere behind me inside the house. I didn't turn. The children didn't react either. It was as if they already knew everything happening inside, without needing to see it. The smaller one stepped closer. Just one step. Still not crossing the line. Still waiting. But now the space between us felt thinner, like distance was losing meaning. The porch light flickered again, this time longer. The shadows around them deepened, stretching behind their feet in ways that didn't match the light. For a second, I thought I saw a movement inside that shadow. Not them, something behind them, watching through them. The thought made my stomach tighten. My hand shifted slightly on the door, and that's when the older child finally spoke. Not loud, not urgent, just certain. "You can let us in," it said. The words weren't a request. They were a suggestion that already assumed agreement. A strange pressure built in my chest. Not fear exactly. Something heavier. Expectation. Like the house itself was listening for what I would do next. Then something happened that made everything feel wrong. From inside the walls, I heard my own voice, not speaking clearly, just fragments, echoes of words I hadn't said out loud. The house was remembering, or repeating. The children didn't move when it happened, but their attention sharpened, like they heard it too. The smaller one tilted its head again, this time slower, more deliberate. "We can't come in unless you let us," it repeated. But now the sentence felt different. Not spoken, confirmed, as if something inside the house had already started agreeing. I stepped back without meaning to. The door creaked slightly wider on its own. Just a fraction, not enough to notice, but enough to feel. The air from outside slipped in again. Colder now, heavier, like it had weight beyond weather. The children didn't step forward. They didn't need to. They just waited. And in that waiting, I realized something I didn't want to understand. Invitation was not words. It was hesitation. It was silence too long held open. And my house had already begun to respond. The bedroom window started changing before I noticed it. At first, it was nothing obvious. Just a feeling that the glass looked closer, like it had moved slightly inward while I wasn't paying attention. The nights became harder to sleep through. Not because of noise, because of watching. From across the street, they were always there. The two children, standing under the same dim stretch of streetlight. Every night, same position, same stillness. It didn't matter if hours passed, if I blinked or turned away. When I looked back, they hadn't moved. That should have been impossible. But the world stopped caring about impossible a while ago. I began to notice the window more than them, because the glass started behaving wrong. Reflections didn't match the room anymore. Sometimes my face would lag behind my movement. Sometimes it would look at me when I wasn't looking at it. And sometimes there were shapes behind me that didn't exist when I turned around. The children outside never changed. But something in the glass did. At night, when I turned off the lights, their silhouettes remained visible. Not outside, in the reflection, as if the glass was holding on to their presence, even when my eyes couldn't. The room felt colder, near the window. Not draft cold, deep cold, like the glass was absorbing warmth instead of letting it pass. One night, I stood too long watching them. The silence outside pressed against the window in soft waves. No cars, no wind, only that faint, constant hum I couldn't place. Then the glass vibrated, barely, like a breath held on the other side. And in the reflection, one of the children raised its hand, not toward me outside, toward me inside, mirroring exactly. My movement had not happened yet, but it did it anyway. My chest tightened. I turned sharply toward the street. They were still there, still unmoving, but the reflection behind me showed something different. The hand was still raised, and it was waiting for me to notice. Sleep stopped coming after that. Nights became long stretches of sitting near the window, watching without understanding why I couldn't stop. The glass began humming more often, soft at first, then constant, like electricity trapped in water. I started noticing details I didn't want to see. The reflections of my room would shift slightly when I wasn't looking directly, doors appearing half open when they were closed, corners darker than they should be, and always them. Outside, inside the glass, never crossing, never leaving, just watching. One night, I whispered without meaning to, "What do you want?" The words barely left my lips, but the reflection reacted instantly. Not the children outside, the ones in the glass. Their heads turned slightly, synchronized, like they had been waiting for that exact question. And for the first time, I felt something respond, not through sound, through the window itself, a pressure against the glass, as if something on the other side had leaned closer to hear better. I stepped back slowly. The reflection stayed closer than I did, and that was when I understood. The window wasn't showing them. It was holding them. The call came at 2:17 a.m., not because I checked the time, but because something about the silence changed right before it rang. The house felt paused, like even the air was waiting for the interruption. Then the phone rang once. Sharp, too clean for that hour. I stared at it before moving. The screen lit up softly. Unknown number. No location. No name. Just a blankness that felt intentional. I answered without thinking. That was my second mistake. The first was still standing at the door. At first, there was nothing, just faint static. Then a voice. Small, soft, childlike. We're still outside. No breath followed the words. None. Not even the sound of air moving. Just voice suspended in emptiness. My throat tightened. Who is this? I asked. A pause. Long enough to feel like it was listening to the house instead of me. Then, we need help. The same words, but not the same voice I heard before. This one felt closer, not through distance, through the walls. I looked toward the hallway. The house lights flickered once, slowly, like they were reacting late. The voice continued. Can you open the door? The question wasn't loud, but it didn't feel like it came from the phone anymore. It felt like it came from the space around me. I stepped toward the window, instinctively. Outside, the street was empty. No porch movement, no shadows, but near the telephone pole, two figures stood still. The children, not at the door this time, but connected somehow to the line itself. The wires above them stretched slightly wrong. Too tight, too alive. The voice in the phone continued, softer now, just a little. The lights in my house flickered again, not random, timed. Every word matched the pulse in the bulbs. I backed away from the window. The phone crackled louder, and for a brief second, I heard something beneath the voice. Not breath, but absence of it, like the sound of someone trying not to exist. Are you alone? It asked. I didn't answer. The silence I gave felt heavy immediately. The house reacted. A cabinet creaked open somewhere behind me. Slow, deliberate. The voice on the phone changed slightly. Not in tone, in certainty. You're alone, it said. The lights dimmed, then brightened, then dimmed again, like the house was struggling to decide what was true. I walked slowly toward the hallway. Phone still pressed to my ear. Outside, through the window, the children hadn't moved. But now I understood. They didn't need to move. They were already inside the line, inside the house, inside the question. The voice returned one last time, but quieter, final. We'll wait. And then the call ended. No disconnect tone, no silence, just absence. And in that absence, the house felt fuller than before. The night after phone call felt different. Not louder, not darker, just misaligned, like the world had shifted a few inches away from where it used to be, and nothing had admitted it yet. Inside the house, the air was still warm, but it no longer felt like mine. It felt shared, held, observed. I noticed the shadows first, not the normal ones cast by furniture or corners. These were different. They appeared where no light source existed, stretching across walls without permission, folding into places that should have stayed empty. At first, I told myself it was exhaustion, sleep deprivation, the kind of tricks tired eyes play when the mind starts filling gaps. But the shadows didn't fade when I looked directly at them. They stayed, waiting. Across the street, the children were there again. Of course they were, still positioned under the streetlight like they had been placed there, not walking there. Their outlines were steady, unchanged from the night before. But now, they weren't alone in how they existed. Beneath them, the shadows were wrong. Too dense, too sharp, like the darkness under their feet didn't belong to the ground. It belonged to them. A faint hum came from somewhere near the window. Not electrical, not mechanical. More like pressure in the air itself. I stepped closer, without meaning to. The glass felt colder again. Not cold like weather, cold like awareness. The shadows inside the house shifted slightly when I moved, not reacting to light, reacting to me. That realization made my stomach tighten. I turned away from the window slowly, but the feeling stayed behind my eyes. Like something had memorized where I was standing. The house creaked. Once. Then silence again. Outside, nothing changed. The children didn't move, didn't blink, didn't acknowledge the passing time. But the shadows beneath them deepened further, spreading outward in unnatural shapes that didn't match the pavement. It looked less like darkness and more like openings, thin gaps in reality pretending to be absence. The next day should have helped. Sunlight came through the curtains, pale and weak. The street looked normal again. Ordinary cars, ordinary trees, ordinary silence. But the shadows didn't leave. They hid better, in corners, under furniture, behind door frames, where they didn't need light to exist. I tried to ignore them. That was easier in theory than in practice, because every time I looked slightly away, I felt them shift, not visually, emotionally, like being watched from just outside thought. The children were still outside when I checked. Same place, same distance, same stillness. But now I noticed something I hadn't before. Even in full daylight, their shadows didn't match them. They didn't connect to their feet properly. They didn't stretch with the sun. They just existed under them like separate things, detached, waiting. That evening, I tried something. I turned off every light inside the house, not out of courage. Out of curiosity, I didn't fully understand. The moment the last bulb went dark, the shadows inside the house became clearer, not darker. Clearer, like darkness had its own definition now. They moved slightly, not toward me, but toward alignment, as if they were trying to match something outside the walls. A soft sound came from the hallway. Not footsteps, not breath, just a suggestion of presence shifting its weight. I didn't move. The house didn't either. But everything felt paused, held. Then I saw it. A shadow that wasn't mine stretched across the living room wall. It didn't come from furniture. It didn't come from me. It came from the direction of the front door. Long, still, patient, and directly beneath it. I knew without looking. They were there, outside again, but closer than before. The air near the door felt heavier, not colder, not warmer, heavier, like gravity had thickened around that single point of the house. I didn't approach, but the shadow did. It shifted slightly toward the doorframe, not entering, just testing, measuring. Outside, the children remained motionless, but the shadows beneath them deepened again, stretching outward like spilled ink learning how to crawl. I realized something then. The shadows weren't following them. They were arriving before them. Inside the house, one of the corner shadows moved slightly against the wall. No source, no cause, just motion. Slow, intentional. I stepped back. The shadow stopped immediately, as if aware of my attention. That was the first time I understood the pattern. The shadows didn't behave like absence. They behaved like attention, like something noticing where I looked and adjusting itself accordingly. Outside, the children finally shifted. Not forward, not backward, just slightly closer together. In sync, the streetlight above them flickered once. And in that flicker, I saw something impossible. Their shadows beneath them were no longer separate. They were connecting, like threads pulling toward the same unseen point. Inside my house, every shadow responded, all at once. Walls darkened in places they shouldn't. Corners deepened. The air felt like it was folding inward, slowly, carefully. And for the first time, I understood what was wrong. The shadows weren't where light failed. They were where something else succeeded. And whatever it was, had already started learning the shape of my house. The house changed after the shadows began moving, not visibly at first, but in the way it responded, like it was no longer just a place I lived in, but something that was listening. It started small. A cabinet opening on its own in the kitchen. Slow, careful, no crash, no rush, just a soft creak of wood shifting, like a patient hand had touched it. I remember standing in the hallway, staring at it. The air smelled faintly metallic, like dust warmed by electricity. The silence felt thick, pressed into every corner. Then I heard it, a whisper, not from outside, not from me, from the walls. Fragments of sound, broken syllables repeating like a memory that didn't belong to the house. Help, come in, please. The same phrases, the ones they had spoken. The house was repeating them, but not like echo, like learning. Across the street, the children were still there, unmoved, unchanged, but something about their stillness felt more connected now, as if distance had stopped matching entirely. That night, I noticed the doors. They began reacting before I touched them. The bedroom door creaked slightly when I walked near it. The bathroom door shifted just a fraction when I thought about opening it. Not opening, thinking. The house was anticipating intention. I stood in the hallway longer than I should have, listening to the soft movements inside the walls, like something was turning pages made of wood and plaster, trying to understand language, trying to understand them. Then, from the living room, a voice formed again. Not the children this time, the house itself. It remembers them. It felt like, not spoken. Realized, a drawer slid open behind me. Slow, deliberate. Inside was nothing unusual, just empty space. But it felt like it had been opened for a reason, like the house expected me to understand what belonged there. That was the first time I stopped feeling like I was alone inside my own home. The second time was worse, because the house started reacting to names, not spoken ones. Thoughts. Every time I thought of the children, something shifted. A light flickered, a floorboard creaked, a cabinet responded. It was subtle at first, then undeniable. The house was listening. Across the street, they finally moved, just slightly. The older one turned its head toward my house, not toward the window, toward the structure itself, like it could hear what the walls were saying. The air inside my home tightened, like the house was holding its breath. I stepped back into the hallway. The lights dimmed without reason, then returned weaker, and in that weak light, I saw something that made my chest go cold. The walls were no longer just walls. They were layered, like something had been written into them. Not text, not symbols, but impressions, memories that didn't belong to me. The house was no longer repeating the children. It was remembering them. And worse, it was organizing them, like it was trying to place their presence into structure, to give them form inside the space. That night, I heard footsteps upstairs. Slow, soft, measured. I stood frozen at the bottom of the stairs, staring into darkness that felt deep in the room should allow. The steps stopped, not because someone reached the top, but because someone noticed I was listening. Outside, the children hadn't moved, but the pressure around them had changed. Now it felt like they were connected not just to the street, but to everything inside it, even my house, especially my house. The whisper in the walls grew quieter after that, not gone, just focused, like it had learned enough to begin waiting. The pattern revealed itself slowly, not as a discovery, but as repetition I couldn't ignore anymore. They didn't appear randomly. They followed timing, precision, almost like rules. It always began after the same hour, when the street became fully dark and the houses stopped pretending to be awake. Midnight wasn't just a time anymore. It was a condition. I noticed it one night, when everything felt unusually still. The porch light flickered once, then stabilized, and right at that moment, I knew they were coming, across the neighborhood. Faint lights blinked on and off in different homes, not randomly, in sequence, like signals, like warnings. I wasn't the only one seeing them, or maybe I was the only one still remembering it. The children appeared at the edge of the street again. Same positions, same stillness. But now I noticed something new. Other houses had their own versions of silence. Curtains twitching slightly, lights dimming too slowly, people watching from behind glass and refusing to move. The suburb no longer felt like separate homes. It felt like one shared system, and the children were its trigger. A neighbor's porch light across the street turned off, then stayed off. I watched carefully, waiting. Nothing changed immediately, but the absence felt wrong, too complete. The next house's light flickered, Then another. It spread slowly, like a chain reaction. The children didn't move. They didn't need to. The suburb was responding on its own. I realized then that the lights weren't just lights. They were communication. When they stayed steady, something held back. When they flickered, something got closer. And when they failed entirely, something was allowed. The children took one synchronized step forward. Not toward a house. Toward understanding. The air felt thinner again. Every home on the street seemed to be holding its breath at the same time. That's when I understood the rule. Midnight wasn't when they arrived. It was when permission reset. The first time he responded before I spoke, I thought I imagined it. A mistake of timing. A coincidence stretched too far. I was standing in the hallway, staring at the door again. The same door, the same silence. And I thought the question without meaning to. What do you want from me? I didn't say it out loud, not even a whisper. But outside, the boy tilted his head, exactly like he had heard it. Not the others. Just him. The smaller one. The air inside my chest tightened immediately. I stepped back from the door slowly, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But the boy moved again. Not forward, not back, just slightly toward awareness. And then, "We want you to understand," he said, perfectly timed, as if answering the thought I hadn't finished. My stomach dropped, because it wasn't just response. It was precision, like he wasn't hearing words. He was hearing intention. That night, I stopped thinking near windows. But it didn't matter, because thoughts don't stay inside the head when something has learned how to listen. At random moments, memories surfaced, not mine choosing them, but them being pulled up. Childhood fears I hadn't remembered in years. A hallway I didn't want to see again. A voice I thought I had forgotten. And every time it happened, the boy reacted. Slight head tilt, slight movement closer, like he was mapping me, not physically, internally. The older child stayed still, but it didn't feel less present. It felt like it didn't need movement anymore, because something else was doing the observing. The boy appeared closer the next night, then closer again. Distance stopped behaving normally. Sometimes he was across the street. Sometimes he felt like he was behind the glass. And once, I swear he was inside the reflection of my own eye. I tried not to think, but trying to not think is still thinking. And that was enough. The house reacted more now, too. Lights flickered when I remembered things. Floorboards shifted when I hesitated. Even silence felt structured, like it was waiting for input. The boy spoke less after that, because he didn't need to. He already had everything I didn't say. And the worst part was realizing this. He wasn't learning me. He was confirming me, as if I had already been known, just waiting to be heard correctly. The porch light became the only thing I could control. At first, I didn't think it mattered. Just a bulb, a switch, simple electricity. But nothing about the house was simple anymore. I noticed it by accident. When the light flickered, they appeared closer. Not physically closer. Perceptually, like distance had been adjusted without permission. The porch light became a signal. I started watching it carefully. Steady light meant distance. Flicker meant attention. Darkness meant presence. It was never explained, but it was always understood. One night, I tried something. I changed the rhythm. On, off, on again, just to see. The children reacted immediately, not moving toward the house, moving together, synchronized, like they were responding to pattern instead of sound. The light flickered once, then twice, and they stopped, waiting. It felt like communication, not language, agreement. I tried again, different pattern, longer intervals. The boy tilted his head in response, not confused, processing. The air around the porch thickened slightly, like something was being measured. The house creaked softly behind me, and for the first time, I felt like I wasn't just being watched. I was participating. That realization stayed longer than anything else that night, because if the light was communication, then every flicker I made was part of something I didn't understand, and something on the other side was learning how I spoke. The morning after the porch light experiment didn't feel like morning. It felt like a pause that never ended properly. The sky stayed pale for too long, refusing to fully brighten. The air outside my house carried that same strange stillness, like the world had been pressed flat and forgotten how to rise again. I decided to leave the house, not because I felt brave, because staying inside felt worse. The street looked normal at first glance. Lawns trimmed, cars parked neatly, curtains half open in familiar patterns. The kind of quiet suburb that pretends nothing ever goes wrong. But something was missing, not objects. Memory. I walked to the first neighbor's house slowly. Each step felt heavier than it should, like the ground was listening more than supporting. Their porch light was on, warm, ordinary. I knocked. A long silence followed. Then the door opened slightly. A woman stood there, familiar face, the kind you recognize without remembering where from. Her eyes looked tired, but normal, too normal. "Hi," I said carefully. "Did you see anything last night?" The children. Her expression shifted. Not fear, confusion, like I had spoken a language that didn't belong in this place. "Children," she repeated slowly. My chest tightened. "Yes, the ones who come at night, black-eyed." She blinked, once, then shook her head gently. "I think you have the wrong house." The door began to close. "Wait!" I started, but she didn't wait. The door shut softly, not in fear, in dismissal. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at the wood as if it might explain itself. Then I noticed something strange. A framed photo through the glass panel beside the door. It showed her family, her living room, everything normal. But something was missing. Not an object, a presence, a space where something should have been standing, but wasn't. I moved to the next house. Same result. The man who answered looked at me like I was interrupting a normal day that had never been interrupted before. When I mentioned the children, his face tightened slightly. Not fear, annoyance, like I was trying to sell him a lie. "There are no children like that here," he said firmly. Then he closed the door. Too quickly, not defensive. Final. I went to another house, then another. Each time, the reaction was the same. Confusion, denial, rejection. Not one of them remembered, not even vaguely. It wasn't that they were pretending. It was worse. They genuinely had no place in their memory for what I was saying. By the fifth house, something inside me started to shift. Not panic, recognition. Like I was the only one holding on to a version of the street that no longer existed. On my way back, I passed a parked car with family inside. They were laughing softly. Normal movement, normal sound. A child in the back seat turned toward me. For a moment, my breath caught, but the eyes were normal, bright, human, unaware. And then the child looked away again, as if nothing had ever happened, as if nothing ever could. I stopped walking. The air felt wrong again. Not colder, erased, like something had been carefully removed from it without leaving traces. That night, I checked old photos on my phone. The street, the houses, the neighborhood. At first, everything looked correct. Then I noticed the gaps. In group photos, there were spaces where I remembered people standing. But now, no one stood there. In reflections, in windows, in background shots, small inconsistencies appeared. Empty spots that felt intentional, like the world was deleting evidence without asking permission. I sat on my bed for a long time, phone dim in my hand. And outside, I knew without looking, they were still there. But something had changed. It wasn't just their presence anymore. It was what others refused to see. The children weren't hiding. They were being removed from recognition. And I was the only one still remembering them. That realization settled deeper than fear. It felt like isolation, like standing in a world that had agreed on a different version of itself, and left me outside the agreement. And somewhere beyond the window, the street stayed quiet, not peaceful, decided. The house started making a different kind of silence. Not empty silence, occupied silence. The kind that feels like something is holding its breath under the floor. It began at night, when everything else stopped moving. At first, it was just a faint pressure beneath my feet, barely noticeable, like the house was settling into itself. Then came the sound, not scratching, not breaking, breathing, slow, controlled, hidden deep under the wooden floorboards. I stood in the hallway, barefoot, listening without meaning to. The air felt heavier near the center of the house, like gravity had shifted downward. Then I heard it clearly, a soft inhale, followed by a pause too long to be natural. Then exhale, not mine, not the house's, something beneath it. Outside, the children were still there. Of course they were. But now it felt like they weren't the only layer anymore. Like they were just what I could see, while something else remained underneath. The floor creaked, not from weight, from awareness. A whisper formed through the boards. Not words at first, just fragments. Then clarity. Closer. My chest tightened instantly. I stepped back, but the sound didn't fade. It followed, not location. Attention. The house wasn't just remembering anymore. It was being used. The mirrors stopped agreeing with me first. Then the windows followed. And finally, even glass began to feel unreliable. It started one evening when I was standing in my bedroom, staring at the window without meaning to. The street outside looked normal. Still, waiting. But my reflection didn't move correctly. When I turned my head slowly, the reflection lagged behind by a fraction of a second. At first, I blamed tiredness. Then it smiled. I didn't. My body went cold. I stepped back immediately. But the reflection stayed where it was, watching me from a version of the room that no longer matched mine. Behind it, shapes formed. 2 children, standing inside the reflection. Not outside. Not visible through the window itself. Only through what the glass decided to show. I turned sharply. The street outside was empty. No movement. No figures. But the reflection remained unchanged. The children were still there. Behind me, inside the glass. One of them raised its hand slightly. Not waving. Not greeting. Copying. But delayed. Like it was learning the sequence of being me. I stopped using mirrors after that. But glass is everywhere. Windows. Screens. Even water and a glass on the table. Every reflective surface became uncertain. Every surface felt like it might be showing something else when I wasn't looking directly. At night, I saw them more clearly. Not outside. Always behind me. Never entering the room itself. Just waiting inside reflections that didn't belong to the present moment. One reflection blinked when I didn't. That was the moment I stopped trusting my own sight. It always started with the weather, not slowly. Instantly, like the sky was responding to their presence instead of reacting to it. The first drop would hit the window before I even saw them. Soft rain. Too soft. Almost silent. Then everything would blur. Outside light would fade into gray distortion, like the world was being erased layer by layer. And there they would be, standing in the rain that didn't feel like rain. It didn't splash properly. It didn't bounce. It just stayed. On skin, on glass, on thought. The children never moved when it rained. They didn't flinch, didn't react. They looked more stable in it, like the weather was meant for them. Inside the house, the sound changed. Not louder, closer, like the rain was falling somewhere between walls instead of outside them. I noticed something strange. Every time they appeared in the rain, the sound of the house shifted slightly, would creaked in rhythm with drops. Lights flickered in uneven timing. Even breathing fell harder to separate from the sound outside. The storm wasn't weather anymore. It was timing, a signal, and the children always arrived at its peak. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. No gradual fading, just absence. The world would return to stillness like nothing had ever happened. But everything inside me stayed wet with memory. I left the house thinking distance would help. It didn't. The street changed instead. At first, it felt normal. Familiar turns, familiar sidewalks, the same parked cars, the same cracked pavement near the corner. But after walking for a few minutes, something shifted. I passed the same house again. Then again, not similar houses. The same one. I turned back, walked in a different direction. Still there. The street wasn't leading anywhere anymore. It was looping, like it had forgotten how to continue forward. The children appeared at intersections I didn't remember reaching, always watching, never following, just waiting at points I would eventually pass no matter what direction I chose. I started walking faster, then slower, then stopping completely. It didn't matter. The street adjusted itself around me. Like geography had become optional. The air felt heavier with each loop, not physically heavier, mentally tighter, as if the space itself was compressing awareness into smaller and smaller circles. The children never spoke, but their presence became more frequent with each repetition. At one point, I swear I passed them standing on both sides of the same street corner at once. Two versions of the same stillness, watching different versions of me. I stopped trying to leave after that, because the street had already decided where I would end up, and it wasn't forward. The bedroom door changed direction one night, without making a sound. I only noticed it because I tried to open it the wrong way. It didn't respond. That should have been impossible. It had always opened outward. Always. But now it resisted like it had never been designed the way I remembered. I checked the hinges, the frame. Everything looked the same, but the behavior wasn't. The next night, I tested it again. Slowly, carefully, the door moved inward, just slightly, not fully, but enough to confirm something had changed. I stepped back immediately. The air in the room felt different near it, denser, like pressure was building behind the wood. Each night after that, it shifted more, a fraction at a time, like something was slowly correcting it, or rewriting it. I began barricading it. Chairs, a dresser, anything heavy enough to resist movement. But every morning it was reset, neatly, as if nothing had been there at all. No scratches, no noise, just silence pretending nothing happened. Outside, the children never touched it. But every time they appeared close to the house, the door shifted slightly inward, like it was responding to them, without permission. One night, I stood in front of it for a long time, listening, and I realized something that made my skin tighten. The door wasn't being forced open. It was learning how to open the right way. The house stopped filling the silence with noise. Instead, it began filling it with meaning. It started with the children speaking less. Their visits didn't change in presence, only in speech. Fewer words, longer pauses, heavier gaps, and somehow those gaps became louder than anything they said before. At night, I would stand near the window and wait for them to appear. They always did. Same place, same distance, same stillness. But now when they spoke, it felt like the space between sentences was doing most of the talking. We need, long pause, you to listen. The silence after need felt like pressure in my ears, like something invisible leaning closer to complete the thought. I noticed the house reacting again. Lights dimmed during pauses. Floorboards tightened when words stopped. Even my own breathing started to feel out of rhythm with their silence. It was no longer what they said. It was what the silence allowed me to understand. And I understood too much, because every pause felt personal, directed, like the gaps were aimed at me specifically. The children didn't move during those gaps. They didn't need to. Something else was doing the reaching, something inside the silence itself. That night, I stopped listening for words. I started listening for absence, and it answered more clearly than anything else ever had. It began with a photo I didn't remember taking. My phone had no record of the moment, no sound, no memory of standing still long enough to capture it. But it was there, the street, my house, the porch light faintly glowing, and me, standing in the frame. But I wasn't alone. Behind me, just slightly out of focus, were the children, still, watching. I dropped the phone immediately. It hit the carpet softly, too softly, like even impact was being muted. When I picked it up again, the image had changed. The children were closer, not dramatically, just enough to feel wrong, like the picture was updating itself when I wasn't looking. I turned the phone off, but the image stayed in my mind longer than the screen. The next time I checked, the photo had changed again. This time, one of them was facing the camera, even though I never saw them face it when I was there. It felt like the picture remembered things I didn't, and worse, it remembered them correctly. I stopped trusting images after that, because reality had started behaving like something that could be edited. I tried forgetting them, It didn't work. Not because memory failed, but because forgetting made them closer. It started subtly. Whenever I stopped thinking about them for too long, something would interrupt it. A flicker of light, a soft knock, a pressure near the door that didn't fully become sound. It was like absence triggered presence. So I tested it. I forced myself not to think. Minutes passed, then hours. For a moment, it almost worked. The house stayed quiet. The street stayed still. And then, a knock, 3 taps, exactly the same rhythm as before. I froze instantly, because I hadn't been thinking about them. Not consciously, but something inside me had remembered anyway. The children appeared at the edge of the porch again that night, closer than before, as if memory itself had shortened the distance. The more I tried to forget, the more precise their timing became, like they were waiting inside thought, not outside it. I realized then that forgetting wasn't protection. It was invitation delayed. And memory was the door they never needed to knock on. The night didn't end. Not properly. Not at all. At first, I thought I had stayed awake too long. But the sky refused to change. No sunrise. No shift in color. Just a stretched version of darkness pretending to hold time and place. The children still stood outside when I checked. But something about them felt different now. More settled. Like they belonged to this version of time more than I did. The house clock stopped making sense. Hours repeated or skipped without warning. The concept of later started to dissolve. I tried opening the curtains fully. The outside world looked unchanged. But it didn't feel like a morning waiting to happen. It felt like a night that had forgotten how to leave. The children didn't move during any of it. They didn't need to, because time itself wasn't pushing them forward anymore. It had stopped pushing anything. And I realized something that made my stomach tighten. Morning wasn't missing. It had been removed. The voice came from the door one night without knocking. Just sound. Soft. Familiar. Impossible. Open it. I froze instantly because I knew that voice. Not clearly. Not fully. But enough. It carried something that felt like safety. Like memory. Like warmth I couldn't place but wanted to trust anyway. My hand moved toward the door before I stopped it. That hesitation felt intentional, like something wanted me to notice how easily I could move. Outside, the children stood still. But now I couldn't trust what outside meant. The voice came again. Closer, not louder. Closer. You don't have to be afraid. My chest tightened painfully, because fear wasn't what I felt. It was recognition, the kind that bypasses logic. The kind that feels like home even when it shouldn't. I looked through the peephole. The children were there, but the voice didn't match them. It matched something else. Something I had lost track of. Something I missed without remembering what it was. The voice softened again. Patient, I'm here. The house lights flickered once, and for a moment, I almost opened the door. Not because I believed it, but because part of me already did. I stopped trusting the dark after that night. Not because it changed, but because it learned. The streetlights began turning on before I reached them. Not all at once. One by one. Ahead of me, like the street was anticipating where I would step next. I walked slowly at first, watching it happen. A light flicked on near the corner. Then another further down. Then another beyond that. Always just ahead. Never behind. The glow spilled onto empty pavement, revealing nothing until I reached it. And then they were there. The children, standing inside each lit circle like they had been waiting inside the light itself. Not moving into it. Already part of it. I stopped walking. The next light turned on anyway. Far ahead, as if my decision didn't matter. As if movement was no longer required for outcome. The street didn't guide me anymore. It predicted me. And every prediction came with them already present. I tried turning around, but the lights followed the direction I wasn't facing. Lighting paths I didn't want to take, and leaving darkness only where I no longer stood. It felt like the world was no longer responding to me. It was responding through me, and the children were its confirmation. I left the house at dawn, or what should have been dawn. It didn't feel like escape. It felt like delay. The house door closed behind me softly, too softly, like it didn't care whether I came back. The street was empty again, or pretending to be. But even as I walked away, I felt it. The house was still occupied. I didn't know how. I didn't know why. But absence stopped meaning absence a long time ago. Hours later, I found myself looking back. The windows were dark, still, normal. But then I saw movement. Inside, not reflections, not tricks of light. Something inside the house shifted when no one should have been there. A curtain moved slightly. A shadow crossed the hallway. I hadn't opened anything. I hadn't left anything behind. And yet it was not empty. That realization followed me all the way back. Because leaving didn't disconnect me anymore. It only changed perspective. The house was no longer a place I lived in. It was a place that continued without me. The children stopped speaking that night. Completely. No polite requests. No rehearsed explanations. No questions at the door. Just presence. Stillness sharpened into something more deliberate. They stood closer than ever before. Not crossing. Not needing to. The air around the porch felt compressed, like the space itself was shrinking toward them. I waited for words that didn't come. The silence felt different now. Heavier. Final. Like something had already been decided, and conversation was no longer required. I looked through the window. They were there, unblinking, unmoving, but no longer asking. And that was worse, because asking meant possibility. Silence meant certainty. The porch light flickered once, then steadied, and in that steady glow, I understood something that made my breath catch. Consent was no longer part of the exchange. It had already been accounted for. I checked every lock in the house that night. Twice. Then again. Front door. Back door. Windows. Bolts. Chains. Everything secure. Everything in place. Everything familiar. But the feeling didn't change. Because safety had stopped being mechanical. It had become conceptual. I stood in the hallway for a long time, listening to the house breathe around me. Then I heard the front door open. Slowly. Without sound. I didn't move, because I already knew what I would see. The children were inside, not entering, already present, standing in the living room, like they had always been part of it. No broken lock, no forced entry, no transition at all, just placement. My chest tightened as I stepped back. The house didn't react. It didn't resist. It didn't defend. It simply accepted. And that was when I realized something worse than intrusion. The locks had never been real barriers. They had been beliefs. And beliefs don't stop anything that doesn't need permission. The children didn't move closer. They didn't have to, because distance no longer applied inside the house. Everything had already been decided somewhere I couldn't see. The night felt like it had been waiting for a long time. Not hours, not days, something older than both. The house was quiet in a way that felt complete, not empty. Finished. I stood in the hallway for a long time, staring at the front door. It didn't feel like an exit anymore. It felt like a conclusion. Outside, the children were there. Of course they were. But this time, nothing changed when they moved closer. No flicker, no pressure, no warning, just certainty. They stood at the threshold without speaking. No request, no invitation, no negotiation, only waiting. And for the first time, I didn't feel resistance inside me, not because I understood, but because something in me had grown tired of not understanding. My hand moved to the door, slow, heavy, not guided, not forced, just inevitable. The lock turned, soft, final. The door opened fully. Cold air moved through the house like it had been held back for a very long time. The children didn't step forward. They didn't need to, because the moment the door opened, something else changed. Not the outside, not the inside, the boundary between them. The house felt suddenly still in a way that erased direction. No up, no down, no separation, just presence, all at once. The living room behind me looked normal for a second too long. Then it didn't, not because it changed, but because it stopped needing to appear separate. And I understood then what I had been part of the entire time. They were never trying to enter. They were trying to be recognized. And when I finally opened the door, there was nothing left to cross.